What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be the next album review for another 2021 album. And as you can see, I'm going to be reviewing the latest album from the band Gojira, entitled Fortitude. Now this is the band's 7th studio album, and for those that don't know this band, Gojira are, in my opinion, one of my major big favourite metal bands outside the UK and the US, and they are based in France, and this is the follow-up to their 2016 album entitled Magma. Now, for me, Gojira were one of the very first metal bands that I had discovered to listen to something very viciously atmospheric and heavily groove-oriented. But not only that, but to release music with the different blends involving the progressive metal side and as with the technical side of their menacing brutality. And this discography of the band is one of my favorites. So I was really anticipated to listen to this new album for the first time, and that they have released a few singles earlier this year, including the track Of Another World and Born for One Thing. This album is definitely at a pretty consistent yet a versatile arranged record. They still blend in their signature sound onto the great cacophony of the heaviness of the instrumentation, but on this album at the same time they do incorporate some various different ranges of influences. The first song on the album, of Born for One Thing, is a fantastic, fast alternate picking / massive chugging heavy number. It's a brilliant track with its syncopation on both the guitars and the drumming that sounds direct and tight onto its pressure of the way the sound of the track goes. The vocals are really, really good onto this track, and also onto the melody, which the vocals are howling onto the sound of reverb. Some of the guitar riffing can be pretty sludgy and big at the same time, because on something groovy and punchy onto its style, I really liked the arrangement onto the melody and layered guitar sounds, which drives the song all the way through from the start to the finish. It's a really good song onto the sound of something striking and yet assaulting with maddening results. Amazonia, which is a very different, very tribal-ish kind of introduction, because onto the section of the rhythm that was pretty steadily paced and very effective, with a really good selection onto the groovy riffs and the progressing nature of the music. This is more or less on a more percussion and less exploring on a complex side of the instrumentation. I really dug this track because onto a different aspect onto the variety on the way the music works out. And single Of Another World, which brings in still the very controversial amounts of the words and comments for a lot of people. But I think that this track does have a really good mark of presentation of some wild tapping and tremolo picking. It is on a different tone lyrically onto something on a space themed, and as well with many of Gojira's lyrics over time, they can be very personal but also incorporate something very political involving environmental issues to global warming, etc. It is not strong of a song, but I do like it. I think the chorus does stand out. However, I think the bridge section is weak and it doesn't really blend into something great of a build-up, but it's a very big grower, so I do give the track more credit the more I come back and repeat this track. So Another World is a song that I do like for the most part. The track of Hold On is something on a different aspect onto the style and sound here, because the opening to this track opens with the multi-tracked sounds of vocal harmony, but then the music grows and the beat is delivered on a simple and a less complex sound again. The distorted riffs onto this track sound really good. The vocals later on sound brutal because of Joe's range. Joe's vocals on the album are absolutely awesome onto this album. It's a decent number, but it's not one of the favorites like the first two tracks that I had heard so far. Then we go to the song of New Found, which is a wicked, punishing song because of some more brutal guitar riffing and menacing drumming. This is a song that reminds me on some of their last albums, like L'Enfant Sauvage, being, in my opinion, one of their best albums. It's so precise on its complexity and the brilliant, masterful work on something very melodic and yet very heavy onto the technicality. It's an excellent song right from the start to the end because it flavors itself with its own goodness. The title track of the album, Fortitude, and this is where the weaknesses come into plan here, in my opinion. This is more or less a 2-minute decent instrumental, some more bass guitar work and more clean guitars on this one. Very tribal inspired from what I think, with wordless vocals. This is more or less one of the tracks that I could personally do with less repeats because it doesn't really fulfill me as much. That leads into the next track that continues that similar sound of the chant. Like sound onto the structure, repetitive all the way through, but does incorporate a lower tuned, distorted type of fuzzy sound. It's not one of the songs that was at a really big building up progressive sounds, and it's personally one of the weakest numbers on the album, but I do respect the involving incorporations that the band wanted to do for this track and the title track, but these two tracks don't really fulfill me as well as most of the tracks here. Sphinx, which brings a massive return onto the progressive and violent technical sound with an ascension onto its mentality of the vocals, the vicious riffs. It's a similar sound that reminds me of an album of theirs, of The Link, or from one of my favorite metal albums ever, their album From Mars to Sirius. But I think this track by itself is an amazing blending of a song on some more progressiveness and descending into some more heaviness onto the rhythm sections that sound crushing and punishing as well. Then go into the next track of Into the Storm. This is where the atmosphere definitely shines onto this track because this is a wonderful and a pretty emotional sounding vocal performance from Joe on this track. This sound of this song is phenomenal because it sounds ominous onto its exploration, and yet it does continue that really weary sound of instrumentation to the track of The Trails, which does continue that type of eerie sound like of Into the Storm. It's pretty eerie at the same time. Onto the clean vocals that sound very good on this track, and Joe does provide a bit of a whispering type of performance, which does blend in a bit of a creepy type of touching sound. I think it's one of the best tracks on this album because of that type of atmosphere. And then the album concludes with one of, in my opinion, the new all-time favorite classic sounds from Gojira of Grind. This track alone is a way huge monster of a song that blows things into a very fast, awesome power of territory, again onto some more heavy riffing and assaulting drumming. It's a very strong way of patterns that go together so masterfully. To me, this is the best track on this album, and as well onto its progressive yet wonderful crescendo from the mentality of the introduction to the last touches to finalize the album very, very well. One of the best tracks that Gojira had ever written, in my opinion. This definitely stands out as much as most of the tracks on the album. I think Grind, as the one song by itself, is a masterpiece of a song. This album, Fortitude, is a very, very good album, and the production is also a wonderful, excellent sound of production from the distorted guitars and the triggered drums, and as well onto the mixing, which is a great addition to add in a lot of texture and heavy depth that this album does continue to provide the more I come back to the album. And I think that this album by itself, as a follow-up to Magma, being at a pretty different, versatile record, I think this is a really strong, solid album, despite some of the weaknesses on some of the tracks. So that's all I would like to say of this album, of Gojira's latest work on Fortitude. And also, let me know what you guys think of this album in the comments down below. So I'm going to give this album a 9 out of 10. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.